Now we need to return the state to our child components this way. And we need to return provide our client and rooms in this value. We need to pass our child components inside this game context. Our child components will be provided through the props. So now everything is done in our game context. Okay, we also need to export this game context and also this game provider. Now let's import our game provider in app.js. Okay, game context. We would wrap every components inside this game provider so that our global state is available to every component. Now inside of our home.jsx, let's define a function to create ColyseusClient. First we need to import our global states inside of this component. We need to import game context to use our global states. To use our context, we also need to import use context. Now we will import all our game states, global game states. And we'll provide our game context to use context. We also need to import Colyseus. So import everything with an alias of Colyseus from Colyseus. Now as we don't want to create our ColyseusClient every time screen loads when some state changes, we will be creating and calling this function inside of useEffect. We will be using an empty dependency array so that the client is created only when the screen loads for the first time. So now we need to import use effect. And I'll be declaring it here. We need an empty dependency error. And now I'll be declaring my function inside of this use effect. Let's name it createClient. Let's create our client with the name of ColyseusClient. Now we need to pass the port where our server is running. In our case it is WS for WebSocket. Going to 567. Okay, I made a typo here. That was giving error. Now I will set my global state named client. With this ColyseusClient we just created. Now we need to call this function. And our client will be created when the screen loads. You can also use self-calling function for this purpose, but it has some weird syntax. I guess it is like this. There will be no function name. There will not be any parameters. It would be enclosed inside of parentheses. And there would also be a pair of parentheses here. Now this and this are basically the same thing, but okay, let's go on with this one. Now let's see our form here. Basically what we are doing here is, if there is no room, the room ID is null, then we are rendering this form to create or join a room. We are asking the user to enter their name and then maximum players. Then we are asking to create the room, or if he has room code, then he will enter the room code and click to join the room. Now let's uncomment these lines and create all these functions. Okay, we need to create our maximum player input state also. It was max players input. Remember to use camel case notation always. Now we have to define these handle create and handle join functions. Let's create them here. I will also be creating handle join. Let's call the parameters as the conventional way of writing E for events. Okay. And we also need to prevent the default behavior of refreshing the page. Now we need to create our room from ColyseusClient. We need to pass our room handler as the first parameter. Remember, we named it as my-room. Next we need to pass the second parameter, that would be the options parameter in onCreate event, and we will be passing the additional informations like the name and maximum clients. So let's pass our informations. The name would be the name state that we are giving here, so it is name input. Okay. The second information would be the maximum clients, so let's name it maximum clients, and we need to pass the max client state, that is max player input. Next, as room joining and room creating via Colyseus returns promises, so we need to handle them appropriately. So we need to handle the .then promise as what should we do when the room is created. So we'll define our handle room function. We'll do it a bit later, and then we need to catch any errors after the .then. It would take a error function. Let's say the parameters will be E as error. Then we need to log any errors here. It would be some joining error, and we can also log the actual error. Then finally, when everything is done, we can log the message that the room is created in the finally block. It also takes a fat arrow function. Now let's define our handle room function. We can define it here. And inside of this handle room, we need to set our room state. Okay, it is lagging. This parameter here is the room width that will be setting here. Let's name it room. Now we can log the message that this room is created, or that we have joined this room. This room parameter is the actual room, so it will also have the room ID property. So the room is joined. Now we need to handle our handle join function. We can just copy this whole thing. And instead of create method, we need to use join by ID method given by ColyseusClient. And instead of providing the room handler, we need to provide the room ID. So we are storing room ID in room code input. So we will be passing it here. And in this additional options parameter, we need to pass the information like the name of the user. So we can just remove this additional info of Max client. So now our room creation and room joining functions are defined properly. Now let's test what we have done so far. This is the form. As the creator of the room, I have written the maximum players that can join. Let's say it is 2, and I'll write my name here. Let's say player 1, and I'll be creating the room now. Okay, so I have created the room, and because, see the window here, because we were not rendering anything when room ID is not null, so it is not rendering anything when the room is created.